It's 60 or 61 CE, and Londinium is burning. Archaeologists will one day map this event as a red-black destruction layer up to half a meter thick beneath London's modern streets. Days earlier, Camulodunum fell. Its temple of Claudius smashed, and a relief detachment of the 9th Legion was cut to pieces outside of the colony. Farther up the road, Verulamium would soon meet the same fate. Now carts and townspeople choke the North Road, fleeing the oncoming tribal host. Beyond the firelight, a woman in a chariot watches the temple flare. Her name is Boudicca, queen of the Iceni, and she has come to burn it all down. Welcome. Thanks for stopping by the Time and Tales podcast. I'm Lene.
I'm CJ.
And today we're going to tell you the tale of Boudicca, queen of the Iceni, and pretty much the person who almost burnt Rome out of Britain.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of people tried to do that.
Yeah, a lot of people tried to do it, and she almost succeeded.
Yeah. Rome's superpower was to make people almost get rid of them.
Yeah. Well, their superpower, I think, was to convince people that it was in their best interest to become Roman. So they would go to a place and they would say, well, we've got you surrounded and we've got better weapons and better soldiers than you. There's no chance that you're going to win. So you can either die or you can become a Roman citizen. And that means that you'll get education, you'll get supplies, you'll get soldiers, legions that'll come and defend you and all of these different things. And if you wanted to, you could send your children to Rome for an education. These are all things that they didn't have before the Romans arrived. What's that line in The Life of Brian? What do the Romans even give us?
Oh, yeah. Well, sanitation.
And the roads. Oh, yeah. Of course, the roads.
Education. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Down with the Romans. Down.
Yeah, down with the Romans. Yeah. So the Brythonic Celts, that would be the Celtic tribes of Britain before Rome arrived, were pretty cosmopolitan for their time period. They did have hill forts. They did have massive wealth. They actually made a lot of money with sea salt. So they would refine salt and then they would trade that salt with the tribes of the continent, and particularly in Brittany and France.
The Romans eventually.
Right. They were going to be trading with them. They would just come and take that shit. They were pretty cosmopolitan, but they did not have healthcare. They did not have roads. They did not have cities, places that they could run to other than the average hill fort, which is made of wood. They didn't have stone buildings that could protect them from invasion, and they certainly didn't have Roman legions with their phalanx and ballistas and etc. So there were some benefits to becoming a Roman citizen. However, I do think that was Rome's secret weapon. They came peddling citizenship. It wasn't just do this or else. It was do this, and we're going to give you some stuff that's a lot better than what you have. And so I think that's partially why a lot of the tribes bent the knee in the first place. Boudicca was a Roman citizen, and she was a loyal Roman citizen until she wasn't.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So how did you feel about Europe, CJ? How did you feel about it?
There were parts of it that I really liked, and it seems that France and Spain have collected a lot of old castles. I don't know if it was a hobby for them or something, but they certainly both have many old castles now. And that was neat. I expected more trees. I really wished that I had seen more forests or other types of wildlife.
We're in the wrong part of France.
Well,
we were in the south of France, so we're in Provence. If we would have gone north, there are heaps of trees. But Occitanie is not. It's more lowland until you get to the Pyrenees, and the Pyrenees is where you start getting some trees.
The Pyrenees were cool.
Yeah, they were very cool. Perpetuis was pretty cool.
Yeah, I liked how at Perpetuis you could look on one side and it was pasture land, a little valley. You could hear the cows, and then on the other side it was forest. It really was forest.
It was beautiful.
It was very nice. And then there was a rainbow.
So that castle, Perpetuis, is also a Roman citadel. The cool thing for me about being where we were in the south of France and the south of Spain was that the entire area, every place that we traveled was along a Roman road. Every single place. And we stayed in Narbonne, we stayed in Aix-en-Provence, and we were pretty close to Arles, where there was a huge Colosseum. Then we were in Barcelona, and underneath the city, the Gothic district of Barcelona, it's all Roman, everything. And it's just incredible. We were actually walking down a street, having just gone to the post office, and They're digging up a Roman road right there to the right of us. And there's just archaeologists in the middle of probably one of the busiest cities I've ever seen. And they're just digging up a Roman road. It's 2,000 plus years old. I just think that's the coolest thing ever. So yeah, I've got some complicated feelings about Rome, and I'm sure Boudicca did as well. And I think that's why this is kind of poignant that we talk about this today.
Yeah, that works. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Boudicca, her people had already bent the knee.
They had.
All right. Who did they bend the knee to? Who was the first one that said, hey, this is really in your best interest? And they said, you're probably right.
Well, initially, Julius Caesar attempted a conquest. And when I say that he attempted, he actually managed the conquest portion of it. But then he just dipped out. He was like, okay, well, I came here and I proved this point. And I just want to let you guys know that we're going to come back. And we can come back whenever we want to. And we have a whole lot of dudes. I'll see you later, deuces. And he sails back to Gaul, which is France. He just left it alone. He didn't leave a garrison in place. He didn't leave a governor. He didn't leave anything. Boudicca's story actually takes place about 100 years after Julius Caesar had visited and spent some time whooping up on the Trinovantes and the Iceni, which is her tribe, by the way. So he kind of primed the pump, as it were. Emperor Claudius came in about 50 years later and sealed the deal. By the time Boudicca's story starts, they have been under occupation for about 60 years, I want to say. She's a faithful Roman citizen. They pay their taxes. They pay their tithes. They're not in breach of any contract with Rome. They're not disobeying Rome. They're not harming Rome in any single way whatsoever. But the problem is that she married a guy who thought he was going to outwit the emperor. And remember, the emperor at the time of Boudicca's story is Nero. I think we all know who Emperor Nero is. And if we don't, we'll do a story about him on one of these days. But Emperor Nero was a bit, how should I put this? Emperor Nero was eccentric, to say the least. This is the guy that everybody believes fiddled while Rome burned. That's not necessarily the truth, but that's not the story we're telling today. Emperor Nero had a problem with any rebellion whatsoever. So even the hint, the sniff, the smell of rebellion would make everybody in the Senate freak out, and they would just send troops out to resolve the problem. Or they had a standing order that any hint of resistance or rebellion was to be met with equal force. The problem here is that Boudicca's husband, Prasutagus, he was king of the Iceni. He passes away, and then there becomes an issue about the will. And because there was an issue with the will, meaning who is going to inherit the throne of the Iceni, unfortunately, he had 2 daughters. This is where Rome took some liberties with the law.
No, it's fortunate. I'm sure it's very fortunate the guy had 2 daughters.
In their case, it's not.
Okay.
In their case, it's not. In their case, it was a very bad thing, and we're going to get to it here in a little bit. The story today starts with an argument about the inheritance. And because of that, the potential lawlessness of the Iceni people, according to the Romans, there was a good chance that they were going to rebel based on this inheritance issue. Instead of talking to Boudicca and the Iceni about it, they took some actions that cause all of these problems and lead to the deaths of about 80,000 Romans. I do kind of want to circle back about location. We're going to talk about a few places that are Roman that you're going to recognize today as English cities. After Claudius evaded in 43 CE, Rome stamped down brand new cities. Camulodunum, that's Colchester, Londinium, which becomes London, and Verulamium, which is modern St. Albans.
After Julius Caesar defeated everybody, he's like, okay, well, you guys are Romans now, and let's build some roads and make some Roman outposts. And that's these 3 places.
Well, yes, Claudius. Because remember, Julius Caesar came in and he was like, well, I'm just going to kick your ass real quick and then I'm going to leave.
Yeah, that was his kind of thing.
Yeah, that's basically what happened with Julius Caesar. And again, I have very complicated feelings about Julius Caesar. I think he was horrible and also incredibly brilliant. But anyway, we're not talking about him today. We're talking about Boudicca.
Okay.
If you think about the show Britannia, remember I was telling you about the show? It was on FX for a while.
Yeah. I remember you talking about it for a while.
They pair the story of Boudicca's uprising, her rise to power, and all of the 100 years of Roman occupation in this crazy fever dream of a story, and they pair it with 60s music like The Hurdy-Gurdy Man, which is my favorite song ever. But so if you're interested in watching a show about this time period, that does take a lot of liberties, by the way. It is far from historically accurate. But if you want to watch something that's based in this time period and gets the vibe right for the Druids at least, then definitely watch Britannia.
When you were learning about this or doing your research, was it all based on that show?
No. I've been reading about this since I was a little kid.
All right. So Boudicca was something that you found as a child?
Encyclopedias, bruh.
Is it?
I think we've talked about this before slightly. I didn't like Tweed Valley High. I liked to read encyclopedias, particularly about Roman conquests.
I also liked encyclopedias.
Yeah, they were fun, right?
Well, yeah, they were documentaries. Encyclopedias taught me that ants do not, in fact, have lungs.
What?
Yeah, that was a huge question as a child. I was like, how do ants underground breathe? And I know that they're small. And I knew that almost everything in the animal kingdom requires oxygen to function.
Ants don't?
Ants do, but they don't have lungs.
How do they breathe then?
Right. That was my question. Yeah. If I remember correctly, I think that I do, ants have small holes in their carapace called spiracles. Maybe that's what they're called. But these holes are large enough to allow oxygen through, but not large enough to allow ant blood through. Basically, the entire outside of the ants allows for oxygen or gas exchange directly into the blood.
I don't even know what to say right now.
I don't know either.
You've just sidelined me with some facts that have nothing to do with what we're talking about today, but are equally fascinating.
It was following you with the encyclopedia and how important it was to us as a child. Other than the show Britannia, what books should we read? It's got to be a little bit more than the encyclopedia, which doesn't exist in print form, and a fever dream with 1960s music.
A lot of the research for this episode comes from 3 different books, one of which was Boudicca, Iron Age Warrior Queen by Richard Hingley and Christina Unwin, Boudicca by Miranda Althouse Green, and Roman Britain by Martin Millett. Those are 3 books, nonfiction, that don't read like dusty old nonfiction. They are extremely deep dives, and they're really well researched and very well rounded, and I highly recommend them.
Real archaeology. Yeah, okay, so let's jump into this topic.
Roman Britain in the early 60s CE is stretched thin. Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus is on the far western edge of the province, at Mona, which is modern-day Anglesey, targeting the Druids. This wasn't random. To the Romans, the Druids weren't just priests. They were the intellectual and ideological backbone of native resistance. They were judges, scholars, advisors, keepers of memory. Tribes that fought one another in peacetime would still defer to Druidic authority in war and law. That made Anglesey a political problem, a spiritual headquarters for anyone who wanted Rome gone. Tacitus paints the invasion vividly. Women in black with torches screaming from the shoreline, Druids raising their hand to curse the legions, warriors howling from the trees, Roman soldiers frozen at the sight, not from fear of weapons, but from the sense that the land itself was resisting.
Tacitus. Who is Tacitus?
Tacitus is the Roman historian responsible for our knowledge of these events.
Is it a normal thing to send a historian to something like this?
Tacitus is actually the nephew of Suetonius Paulinus' replacement governor in Britain.
Okay. So It was kind of a nepotism job.
A little bit, yes. The man that would come in to eventually replace Suetonius Paulinus is a man named Agricola. And Agricola is the reason why Londinium becomes built out of stone, for example.
Okay.
Yes.
Suetonius Paulinus is the governor of the whole region?
Yes.
Okay.
He's the governor of Roman Britain.
I'm with you.
Is the commander-in-chief of the legions that are stationed in Roman Britain.
Okay, got it.
When the hesitation broke, Rome crossed the strait, slaughtered defenders, cut down sacred groves, burned altars, and imposed suppressions meant to break the region's spiritual structure. It worked, but at a price. The entire Roman field army was now hundreds of miles away from the southeast. No legions, no auxiliaries, no cavalry. And in that vacuum, something irreversible was already happening on the other side of the island.
What I'm envisioning is Druids that are fighting back while something else is happening.
Let me give you some time and place for this.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we are in southern Britain. That would be southern England now, right? When we say southern Britain, we mean southern Britannia. Britannia would be the Roman province of Britain. Boudicca and her people, the Iceni, are in the far, far east of the country. So they're around Kent.
Okay.
And then where he is headed is to Wales, which is in the far, far west of the country. What Suetonius Paulinus is attempting to do is to stamp out any resistance at all. And normally they would overlook a tribe that they've conquered's religion. But in this particular instance, the Druids weren't having any Roman leadership or any Roman rule whatsoever. And they kept inciting the kings and rulers who had already bent the knee or were thinking about bending the knee to violence and to rebel. Suetonius believes that he can stamp out all resistance if he destroys the religion, root and stem. He chases them across Britain to their sacred island of Mona, which is modern-day Anglesey in Wales. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a full island. It kind of is a peninsula. If you think about Mont Saint-Michel in Brittany.
The castle?
Right. So, sometimes it looks like an island and sometimes it's not an island. It has to do with the tides. It's the same thing at Mona at Anglesey.
Okay, so you can only get in when the gods allow,
right,
when the tides come in and out.
Right. And so the Druids flee there because they honestly believe that the gods are going to protect them, that there's absolutely no way that the Romans are going to be able to get to them on the Isle of Mona. And unfortunately, they're wrong. And their gods are of absolutely no help to them when Paulinus catches up to them. So Paulinus is busy attacking the religious heart and soul of the Celtic peoples of Britain while something else is happening in the east.
Okay.
Do you have a better picture of it now?
Yeah, I really do. Now I understand why the Roman legions aren't there.
Right.
Okay.
I think he'd left behind one legion, and I think it's being poorly managed as well, and you'll see why in a minute.
Well, he doesn't have to worry about his back because they've been subjugated for 100 years.
Or so he believes, anyway.
Okay. All right.
Back in East Anglia, the Iceni kingdom had long operated as a client state of Rome under King Prostatagus. That would be Boudicca's husband. Client kingship was a fragile compromise. Rome got stability without spending money, and local rulers kept nominal autonomy. When Prostatagus died, he tried a diplomatic hedge. He named both the emperor and his 2 daughters as co-heirs. Administrators seized this opening.
It seems that he didn't want to give Rome what Rome believed was its.
Exactly.
Okay.
The Romans did not see Prostatagus' 2 daughters as a viable inheritor of property they believed was rightfully the annex of the Roman emperor.
Okay, so legitimate or not, it wasn't going to work.
Right. Absolutely not. It wasn't going to work because Prostatagus should have never named the emperor as his heir, but he thought that he was going to be keeping the peace that way, give a little bit of power to the emperor, a little bit of power to his own people. And that was a mistake. He should have just named another heir. Even his wife would have been a better choice because then she could have married somewhere else and potentially avoided all of this conflict. But that is not what happens. I don't have all of the answers for it, obviously, but I do think that Prostatagus made a big mistake. The estate was treated as annexed property. Iceni nobles were stripped of their land, and then came the hinge in the record. Boudicca, who complained to the magistrate, was publicly flogged. This is a queen, and she's a Roman citizen as well. They stripped her to the waist and tied her to a pillory and then whipped her in public, which that's just not something you do to a queen.
Right. That's not something you do to a citizen, an actual powerful citizen.
She wasn't breaking the law. She was complaining to the magistrate because they were taking property and food and all of the things that did not belong to them. They had been loyal citizens up to this point. They were paying their taxes. They were doing everything right. The problem was that Rome was not going to let her daughters inherit anything, and they weren't going to take any guff from a woman about it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The other issue here is, this is a trigger warning. If you don't want to hear this part, then please fast forward about a minute or 2. Okay, go ahead and do that now. All right, if you're still here, the Romans didn't stop at publicly flogging Boudicca. They also took her 2 daughters, I think they're about 10 and 12, and they publicly essayed them. And this would be a group situation. An entire contingent of soldiers would hold the girls down and take turns.
Okay.
So
you mean assault?
I mean, essay, yes, sexual assault.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And these are young girls. Boudicca can get over being whipped in public, probably, but could you get over that? I would never get over that. Not ever. And the tribes weren't having that shit either. This didn't happen in a back room. This didn't happen quietly. This happened in public, and it was theater. This was intended to humiliate the dynasty in front of its people. And this was the moment when injury turned into revolt. So Boudicca didn't even have to do anything before people started to come to her and say, absolutely not. This is not what we signed up for. And they started to band together around her.
Before we move on past that tragedy, can you describe Boudicca for me?
Roman writers describe her as tall, commanding with a fierce voice and a torrent of reddish hair. Among the Iceni, she ruled jointly with her husband while he lived, and then alone by the consensus of nobles and client families after he died. Her authority was legitimate, visible, and political, not symbolic. When she rose was standing, and Rome had just given her every reason to unite the tribes.
Oh, yeah.
After the assault on her family, outrage spread quickly. The Trinovantes, displaced by Roman veterans in Camulodunum, joined her first. Their grievances were old and deep: land confiscations, heavy taxes, and the temple that symbolized Rome's presence. Other groups followed, including factions among the Catalavellani, the Cornovi, and the segments of the Duboni.
Were those neighbor tribes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At this time, Britain was a mosaic of tribes, some hostile to one another. But Boudicca accomplished something rare. She gave them a single unifying enemy. The moment was perfect, and she chose her first target with precision.
Seems like they already had an enemy, so that, was the step one of certainly the easier part of it.
Right. A lot of the tribes didn't believe that Rome was an enemy until they did to her what they did to her.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. What they did was anathema to all of the tribes. I'm going to use a really horrible word here, guys, but you don't rape 2 children and then expect nobody to do anything to you or expect to retain the respect of people that you've previously conquered. It doesn't matter what you're offering them. However much sanitation and roads you offer is irrelevant in the face of that. They were already chafing under the Roman boot as it was. This was just the spark that set that fire. Yeah.
Okay.
And again, she didn't even have to go out and seek any vengeance on her own. They all came and laid down their swords and asked her to lead them. That says something about who she was as a person and how strong a personality she had.
All right, I follow.
Again, Camulodunum is Colchester in modern-day England. This was symbolic ground. It was the first Roman colony in Britain, a settlement for retired legionaries who received prime farmland seized from local people, because that's what they were promised. The Romans would ask the legionaries to march thousands of miles during the lifetime of their service, and they would get to keep booty and they would get paid and etc. But it wasn't a lot of money. What they would do it for was the land that they were promised at the end of their service. And after a certain period of time, 100+ years, Italy was running out of spare space for the legionaries and their families and etc. So they started putting them in Gaul and in other places that they had conquered. And Britannia was just the newest of these territories that Roman legionaries could expect to be granted land for, and that made them basically nobles. At the center of Camulodunum rose the temple of the deified Claudius, built with heavy taxation and looming over a population that had not asked Rome to be there.
Claudius was the current emperor?
No, Claudius was the emperor who conquered.
Oh,
who
okay.
officially conquered Britannia.
Okay, thanks for reminding me of that. And deified?
Deified, okay, so a Roman emperor or an imperator, which is the Roman term, was a person of divine gifts. They believed that once an emperor had served for any amount of time and successfully led the Roman people, they would become a god.
Oh, I got it.
They would get their own cult, they would get priests, etc., temples, yada, yada, yada. So Julius Caesar had several temples, let's put it that way.
Okay.
To the Romans, Camulodunum marked a moment of victory, but to the Britons, it was occupation carved in stone. When Boudicca marched, Camulodunum was always going to burn first.
Okay, so they were going to go to that symbol of oppression.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And remember, they're building this temple at this time, and I'm sure that the Britons had never seen anything like this. It's built in marble.
Okay.
All of their money and all of their wealth and all of the gems and all of their agriculture and everything else that they're contributing to the Roman occupation is just being, stacked one stone on top of another in their face. So I think it was a giant flag,
Yeah, I understand.
Panic erupted in the colony. Civilians fled into the temple precinct, trusting its thick stone. Appeals went to the procurator, Catus Decianus, who fled the province instead of reinforcing the town. A small auxiliary force was sent, but far too little. A detachment of the 9th Legion marched to relieve the colony's defenders. Boudicca's army intercepted them outside the town. The infantry were annihilated. Only the cavalry escaped north. Inside the temple, defenders held for 2 days until the doors were breached. Archaeology matches this chapter. Burned daub, roof tile, warped by heat, smashed household goods, carbonized beams, a sudden destruction horizon. With Camulodunum erased, the rebels turned south.
So they sent more defenders. Was there a battle, or was it just...
Right, yes, they did. Reinforcements arrived, but far too little too late, right? So they sent infantry against chariots. A little note here about chariots. They were massive, and they had spikes at the end where their hubcaps would be, and they were just absolutely devastating to infantry. And you need shields, you need your own chariots, you need, bulwarks and fort lines and etc. On open ground, you're You're not going to stop this chariot with a few dudes. And apparently, Boudicca was an accomplished charioteer. So they sent too few men with the wrong equipment against an army that was furious and loaded with chariots. So now they're headed south. Londinium was rich, young, and strategically placed, but utterly undefended. And Paulinus had been alerted that there was a revolt happening in the east. He's on his way back from Mona at warp speed, trying to get back to Londinium before an attack happens. But then he realizes that there isn't really much he can do. His legions were exhausted, they were outnumbered, and he was facing an enemy emboldened by victory. If he stayed in Londinium, he would lose the army and the province. He ordered an evacuation instead. Merchants left warehouses behind, officials fled, families sprinted for the roads out of the city. Those who stayed, the elderly, the sick, the stubborn, remained behind as the Roman column pulled away. Londinium at this time is not a city. It doesn't have walls. They don't have any stone structures. Everything is built of wood. It's mostly farms. While they had a lot of crops and they had a lot of weapons and things stored in the settlement, they couldn't really defend it. Furthermore, the land around Londinium was very soggy. It was regularly inundated by the Thames. That made it not really ideal for a large occupying force. Paulinus knew that if he tried to defend Londinium, he was probably going to lose a large number of his men. So he opted to try to find ground that he could meet Boudicca's army at from a point of strength. And because he decided to do that, because he decided to abandon Londinium, Boudicca's forces enter and burn the settlement to the ground. The destruction layer beneath modern London records the fire. Charred beams, collapsed ceilings, melted glass, heat-cracked tile, and the Ash Road stretched on.
Now I understand why we called it the Ash Road.
Yes, the Ash Road is the actual archaeological record of this rebellion that we can actually go and see if we visit London today. A short distance away, Verulamium, which is modern St. Albans, lay along the main road northwest of Londinium. It was wealthy, open, and vulnerable, and it fell really quickly. The burn layer is thinner here, but unmistakable. Charred shop fronts, scorched grain, buildings whose upper floors collapsed in heat. The destruction dates to the same season. 3 towns gone, tens of thousands dead. Rome momentarily stunned.
So this is a big deal.
Yes, a very, very big deal. Some modern estimates put the loss of life around 80,000 people. And remember, these are settlements, not cities. So the only one of them that could be considered a city would be Colchester, which would be Camulodunum. It had stone buildings and stone structures and stone walls, but it didn't save anybody in the city. They killed every single person they got a hold of. And some of them were tribesmen that decided to remain allied with Rome. They didn't get the memo about tribes banding together to push the Romans from their shores. Meanwhile, Paulinus is regrouping. He's gathering together fragments scattered across the province, shaken survivors from earlier engagements, and whatever auxiliaries he could reach in time. He consolidated legionaries, detachments from the 14th Gemina, the 20th Valeria Victrix, and other allied units. The 2nd Augusta never arrived, which is a failure that Tacitus, the historian we discussed earlier, would later mock.
So to be clear, the 14th Gemina, some detachments of the 20th Valeria Victrix, which is a larger force, I assume.
Yes.
Okay. And the allied units. Now, you said the 2nd Augusta never arrived. Was that just like another legion?
Yes, it was another legion. Suetonius Paulinus is actually with the 9th Legion, which, fun fact, they will disappear from the historical record later on. And it's very interesting. We may actually do an episode about that because nobody knows what happened to them. But yeah, these legions would comprise about 3,000 to 5,000 men, and they desperately needed the Augusta and it never showed up. I would say that they had about 5,000 fewer men at least than the tribes. I don't have an exact number because every single book I read has a different figure. But we do know that it was a much, much larger force, and we're thinking somewhere around 100,000 men.
20,000 Romans versus 100,000 tribesmen.
Right. The Romans probably had even fewer men than that as well.
Got it.
With what he had, Paulinus marched north. Somewhere along the long corridor of Roman road, the line that future centuries would retroactively fold into quote-unquote Watling Street, he searched for terrain that could neutralize the Britons' overwhelming numbers. He found it. A narrow defile with rising ground and thick woods behind him, a natural choke point, a place where his smaller force could not be flanked. When the Britons arrived, they arrived in force, tens of thousands. Families and wagons behind the lines, a great crescent of carts, horses, children, elders, animals. To them, it was confidence, even celebration, a witness gallery for the victory they believed was imminent. To Paulinus, a trap waiting to be sprung. Once the rebels pressed forward, they would have no way to retreat. Tacitus describes the Roman ranks in crisp language of someone who'd spoken to veterans. Compact formations, shields raised, pila balanced for the first throw. When the Britons surged forward, their front lines came on in loose order. Chariots sweeping the sides, warriors shouting, banners whipping in the wind. The Romans held and waited. At exactly the right distance, close enough for penetration, far enough to break momentum, Paulinus gave the signal. A full volley of pila. These are heavy iron spears, and they would punch through shields, they would punch through chariots, and they would just kind of rip them apart. Then came the wedge advance, a deliberate grinding push. Shields slammed forward, short swords thrust in tight arcs, the entire formation driving like a single body. Auxiliary cavalry crashed into the flanks, breaking apart clusters of warriors with javelins first. The Britons tried to fall back and ran straight into their own wagons. The line bent, then buckled, then compacted into a crush of bodies with no exit. Horses reared, carts overturned, families scattered, and the retreat turned into a rout blocked by the very walls they'd built behind them. When the fighting stopped, the field was silent except for the wounded and the settling dust. Tacitus gives the Roman losses as light, and the Britons as catastrophic. The tribes had thrown everything they had into a funnel they could not escape.
It sounds like Paulinus, who just came from a large war, knew what he was doing. He chose the ground where his discipline, his formation, his cavalry can really overcome the larger numbers. And then the Britons, they wanted to use just overwhelming force. And that just didn't work in this case, especially since once they discovered that they were in such a bad situation, they couldn't get out of it.
I want to try to give this some context for people who maybe don't understand what a funnel formation looks like. The ground that Paulinus chose was uphill. So they had the high ground, and then they had a hill behind them that had heavy tree cover and lots of rocks. There was no way that Boudicca's army could pull chariots up behind the Roman forces. So they had the high ground, they had completely blocked off any ability for the Celts to get behind them. All they have to do is hold that line. To put this into context, imagine the movie The 300. 300 men against like 1,000,000, right? Numbers count for nothing because they're in a tiny little corridor and they have these tall shields and they just shoulder to shoulder, back to back, hold each other up. That's basically the same situation that Paulinus chose for his legions. So it didn't matter how many chariots Boudicca's army had or how many men they had, because they couldn't get behind the Romans. They couldn't come from the sides. They couldn't flank them, etc. Rome just kind of came down that hill, shoulder to shoulder, locked shields, and just stab, walk, stab, walk, stab, walk, and completely devastated the Celtic forces. I mean, they did supposedly kill 80,000 people between Camulodunum and Verulamium and Londinium, but they lost 80,000 people supposedly on this one battlefield. And that's an incredible loss. Modern archaeology suggested something a little less dramatic than that, but that's still a catastrophic number. Even if it was 10,000 people, that's a lot of people in a day, right? Farmland was abandoned after the battle. Grain stores were destroyed. Soil profiles show years of reduced cultivation after this revolt. And famine is found in the soil. It's found in the bones of the people who lived in these areas. Roman reprisals were swift and punishing. As for Boudicca, Tacitus offers two possibilities. She either poisoned herself to avoid capture, or she died of illness shortly after their defeat. In any case, we don't know. Rome never recorded where she was buried, nor what happened to her from this moment forward.
All right. So the Joan of Arc, the person who was leading
Boudicca,
and
yeah.
inspiring her people, is now gone.
Yes.
Okay.
And supposedly, according to Tacitus, 80,000 people are dead now on this battlefield. And even though archaeologists caution us to say that that's probably an over-exaggerated number because the Romans did that a lot. regardless, like I said, even if there were 10,000 people dead on this battlefield, that's quite a lot of dead people on a field, right? It wasn't just the defeat on this battlefield. They defeated them in every possible way. Because of this revolt, they had famine for years afterwards. No grain yields were nearly as high as they were previous to this revolt. Suetonius Paulinus effectively destroyed an entire culture in a matter of months. At the end of the day, Boudicca's rebellion only made things worse for decades. It's really just sad. And all of this was due to the fact that Prasutagus thought that he was going to outwit the Romans by leaving half of his land to his 2 daughters and the other half to the emperor.
I disagree. I 100% disagree.
Really?
Yeah. The issue wasn't that the land was usurped or taken over, or even the situation with Boudicca's daughters. Now, I'm not saying that didn't have a part in it. However, Paulinus was already destroying their culture, and he was destroying the most holy places that they had, which doesn't need...
They didn't even know about that at that time.
They knew about it. Come on. Somebody ran.
When Prasutagus dies and the public flogging happens and the public essay of her daughters, they weren't yet aware of what had happened at Mona.
I disagree. I absolutely... If it was that
Tacitus says that they didn't know.
Tacitus says a lot of stuff. Somebody would have run. Somebody would have said, hey, they're actually destroying Mona. This is a real big deal. That word would have spread, especially if it were still on an isle. Mona probably begged for armies to show up, and the army couldn't get there. However, with the ignition that happened with Boudicca and the tribes already being angry, that really helped her bringing everybody together. So it wasn't just Boudicca's husband. It was Paulinus destroying their culture, their most sacred places, and reneging on the promise of Roman citizenship. I'm going to say that it was the Romans' fault that this really happened.
Not saying that the Romans are innocent in this at all. I'm not saying that the Romans didn't do wrong. Boudicca was a citizen of Rome. Her daughters were loyal citizens of Rome. There was absolutely no reason for what they did other than to flex. It was basically just a flex. What I'm saying is that Prasutagus could have probably avoided all of this bloodshed, at least in the east, if he had left his lands to someone else, aside from his 2 daughters, because I think that was the invitation that the legions were waiting for. You know what I mean?
I disagree. If they had, after the death of Prasutagus, if the Romans had just come in and said, no, this is not going to work out like this.
So you think they would have done it no matter what?
I think the Romans would have taken what the Romans wanted to take. That's what they did.
I'm not going to argue with that. Obviously, the Romans are not one collective hive mind. There's a lot of dudes that are just going to act, right? A lot of it might have been the magistrate that Suetonius Paulinus put in charge over the region while he was busy effectively destroying their religion.
Right.
I think that guy probably wanted those lands for himself, or he wanted some money and he was just going to help himself while Paulinus was away, because a lot of Romans did that kind of shit,
Right.
The richest tribe in the region, their king just died and he only left a woman in charge. What's a woman going to do? I do think that there is a chance that, yes, you are right, that they would have done this regardless, tried to take advantage of Prasutagus' death no matter what.
Yes.
But I do think that Prasutagus made a mistake in his will. 2 little girls were harmed and his wife was whipped for no reason in public. And it's a really shitty story. I feel really bad for Boudicca and her people. I feel really bad for the Celtic tribes of Britain, and I feel really, really bad for the Druids who fled, who were all slaughtered at Mona. It's a really shitty chapter in history. Makes me think of that, again, of that scene in Life of Brian where they're like, well, what did the Romans ever give us? Roads, sanitation, all of those things are great. But at the end of the day, they came at a cost.
It was still subjugation.
Yes, absolutely. These people weren't allowed to choose for themselves without the threat of death.
Right.
There's no amount of, hey, the Romans gave us running water. that is going to fix that. But, at the end of the day, the Romans aren't there to share their culture. They're there to take their resources. And the people were an aside. I think it's a real shame that Boudicca's army was defeated, personally. I think that if they had won that day, maybe they would have been able to force Suetonius Paulinus into making some kind of agreement with them. I think that if they had won that day, things would have been different for Roman Britannia. Maybe we wouldn't have had it. Maybe it would have ended there. I'm really curious what a Celtic Britannia would have been. I'm really curious how that would have proceeded and how they would have advanced, and how different would our culture today be if Rome had never taken Britain. Boudicca's revolt endures because it was written twice, once in Latin and once in clay. The Norman keep of Colchester Castle still stands on the podium of the Temple of Claudius, the very shrine toppled in the revolt. Conquest built literally atop conquest. In London, beneath modern towers, trains, and offices, the Boudiccan horizon still lies intact, a red-black band that archaeologists can trace through the city. Rome tried to erase her. Instead, it immortalized her in the very ashes of its own settlements. So yeah, guys, let us know what you think of this episode in the comments. And I don't know, what team are you on? Are you on Team Rome or are you on Team Celtic Tribes? I am on Team Celtic Tribes. As always, sources are in the show notes. For updates, you can find me at Ellen Revere Author on TikTok and Instagram. And please follow the Time and Tales podcast on YouTube.
Bye, guys.
Till next time, guys.